Karoline Leavitt walked into the courthouse with a tight grip on her leather briefcase. She had been working on the Miller case for 6 months, and today was supposed to be the day justice would finally be served. The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of the courthouse hallway as she made her way to courtroom 7. Her black heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing in the quiet corridor. At 32 years old, Karoline had already made a name for herself at the Preston & Oaks law firm. She specialized in cases involving corporate fraud, and the Miller case was her biggest yet. Her client, an elderly woman named Betty Miller, had lost her life savings to an investment scheme run by Coastal Investments. Karoline had gathered solid evidence that proved the company had deliberately misled hundreds of seniors. "Morning, Ms. Leavitt," said the security guard as she passed through the metal detector. "Big day today, huh?" "Yes, Ed." "Very big day," she replied with a small smile. Her stomach was in knots, but she didn't let it show. Inside courtroom 7, Karoline set up her materials at the plaintiff's table. She glanced across the aisle where the defense team from Coastal Investments was already seated. 5 lawyers in expensive suits huddled together, whispering and occasionally looking in her direction. Karoline was used to being outnumbered. The courtroom filled quickly. Betty Miller sat in the front row behind Karoline, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Next to Betty were several other victims who had joined the lawsuit. Karoline turned and gave them a reassuring nod. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Winters," announced the bailiff. Everyone stood as Judge Winters entered. He was a tall man in his 60s with silver hair and cold blue eyes. He had a reputation for being strict and had been on the federal bench for over 20 years. "Be seated," he said in a deep voice. After shuffling some papers, he looked directly at Karoline. "Ms. Leavitt, I understand you wish to present additional evidence today." "Yes, Your Honor," said Karoline, standing up. "We have obtained financial records that clearly show Coastal Investments was aware their investment products were failing, while they continued to sell them to clients like Ms. Miller." Judge Winters frowned. "Ms. Leavitt, I've reviewed your motion, and I'm denying it." Karoline blinked in surprise. "Your Honor, these documents are central to our case. The defense has argued that these records were obtained improperly, and I agree. Furthermore, I'm dismissing this case entirely." A gasp went through the courtroom. Karoline felt like the floor had dropped from under her feet. "Dismissing?" "But, Your Honor, we haven't even presented our full case yet," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My decision is final," said Judge Winters, banging his gavel. "This court finds insufficient evidence to proceed. Case dismissed." The defense team barely hid their smiles as they quickly packed up their materials. Betty Miller started crying softly in her seat. Karoline stood frozen in place. This made no sense. Their evidence was strong, and they had followed all proper procedures to obtain the financial records. Something wasn't right. After the courtroom cleared, Karoline sat alone at the table, still in shock. She was joined by Nancy Pierce, a fellow attorney from her firm. "I heard what happened," said Nancy, sitting next to her. "This doesn't make sense. Your case was solid." "I know," said Karoline. "There's something wrong here. Judge Winters didn't even let me argue my position." "Maybe it's time to let it go," suggested Nancy gently. "We can appeal, but Winters has connections all over the circuit. It could take years." Karoline shook her head. "I can't do that to Betty and the others. They trusted me." As they left the courthouse, a man approached them on the steps. He was in his 40s, wearing a rumpled suit and carrying a notebook. "Ms. Leavitt, I'm Gary Klein from the Boston Herald. Can I talk to you about what happened in there?" Nancy tried to wave him away, but Karoline stopped. "What do you want to know, Mr. Klein? Is it true that Judge Winters dismissed your case without letting you present key evidence?" "Yes, that's correct," said Karoline. Gary scribbled in his notebook. "Are you aware that Judge Winters has dismissed 6 other cases against large financial institutions in the past year?" Karoline frowned. "No, I wasn't aware of that." "And are you aware that Judge Winters' son works for a law firm that represents several financial companies, including a subsidiary of Coastal Investments?" Karoline felt her heart rate pick up. "No, I was not aware of that either. Would you be willing to comment on this apparent conflict of interest? Nancy grabbed Karoline's arm. She has no comment at this time, thank you. She pulled Karoline away, but the reporter called after them. Ms. Leavitt, I'm working on a story about judicial misconduct. If you're interested in talking more, here's my card. Karoline took the card and slipped it into her pocket. Back at her apartment that evening, Karoline couldn't stop thinking about what the reporter had said. She opened her laptop and began searching for information about Judge Winters. After several hours of research, she found a pattern that made her blood run cold. Over the past 3 years, Judge Winters had presided over 14 cases involving financial institutions. He had ruled in favor of the institutions in 13 of them. In 8 cases, he had dismissed the lawsuits before they went to trial. Karoline picked up her phone and called Gary Klein. Mr. Klein, this is Karoline Leavitt. I'd like to talk to you about Judge Winters. They agreed to meet the next morning at a small coffee shop downtown. When Karoline arrived, Gary was already there with a thick folder of documents. I've been tracking Judge Winters for nearly a year, he explained, showing her newspaper clippings and court records. There's definitely something fishy going on, but no one has been willing to go on record. Why me? Asked Karoline. Because you just lost a high-profile case, and from what I can tell, you're not the type to give up easily. Karoline smiled slightly. You're right about that. For the next 2 weeks, Karoline divided her time between her regular cases and investigating Judge Winters. She reviewed his past rulings, researched his financial disclosures, and even drove by his large house in an expensive neighborhood. One evening, while working late at the office, Karoline was startled by a knock on her door. It was Nancy. What are you still doing here? Nancy asked, looking at the papers spread across Karoline's desk. Research, said Karoline vaguely. Nancy picked up a document. This is a financial disclosure for Judge Winters. Karoline, what are you doing? Karoline sighed. I think he's corrupt, Nancy. I think he's been taking bribes to rule in favor of certain companies. Nancy's eyes widened. Do you know what you're saying? He's a federal judge. If you start making accusations without solid proof, you'll destroy your career. What about justice for Betty Miller and all the others who lost everything? You can't help them if you get disbarred for going after a judge, warned Nancy. But Karoline had made up her mind. The next day she met with Gary Klein again and showed him what she had found so far. This is good, but we need more, said Gary. We need someone on the inside. Like who? Like a clerk, a bailiff, someone who works with Winters regularly. Karoline thought for a moment. I know someone who used to clerk for him, Amy Rodriguez. We went to law school together. It took 3 days to track down Amy, who now worked at a corporate law firm in New York. Karoline called her and carefully explained the situation. I can't talk about this on the phone, Amy said in a hushed voice. But I'll be in Boston this weekend. We can meet then. That Saturday, they met at a park far from the courthouse. Amy looked nervous, constantly glancing around as she spoke. What I saw in his chambers wasn't right, she said. Meetings with lawyers where no records were kept, envelopes changing hands. Once I found him looking at bank statements from an offshore account. Would you be willing to make a statement? Asked Karoline. Amy hesitated. I don't know. He has powerful friends. People like Betty Miller lost everything because of his corruption, said Karoline. They deserve justice. After a long pause, Amy nodded. I'll think about it. As Karoline drove home, her mind was racing with possibilities. This was bigger than she had initially thought. It wasn't just about getting the Miller case reopened, it was about exposing corruption that had affected countless lives. Her phone rang, and she answered through her car's speaker system. Ms. Leavitt? It was a voice she didn't recognize. This is Daniel Reed from the FBI. We'd like to talk to you about Judge Harold Winters. Karoline's heart pounded in her chest. How did you know I was looking into him? That's part of what we need to discuss. Can you come to our office tomorrow morning? Yes, said Karoline, gripping the steering wheel tightly. I'll be there. She Didn't know if she was in trouble or if the FBI was already investigating the judge. Either way, there was no turning back now. Karoline Leavitt was about to take on one of the most powerful judges in the state, and her life would never be the same again. The FBI office was a plain gray building downtown. Karoline arrived 15 minutes early for her meeting. She wore her best navy blue suit and carried a folder with all her research on Judge Winters. As she waited in the lobby, she wondered if she was making a huge mistake. An agent named Paul Martinez came to get her. He was tall with a serious face and short black hair. He led her to a small room with a table and 4 chairs. "Please have a seat, Ms. Leavitt," he said. 2 other people were already in the room. One was a woman in a dark suit who introduced herself as Agent Kate Simmons. The other was a man Karoline recognized immediately, Bill Gordon, the U.S. Attorney for their district. "Thank you for coming in," said Gordon. "We understand you've been looking into Judge Harold Winters." Karoline nodded. "Yes, I believe he's been accepting bribes to rule in favor of certain companies." "That's a serious accusation," said Agent Simmons. "I know," said Karoline. She opened her folder and laid out the documents she had collected. "I've found a pattern in his rulings. He's dismissed 13 cases against major financial institutions in the past 3 years. In each case, the evidence against the companies was strong." Agent Martinez looked through her papers. "And you think he's being paid to rule this way?" "Yes. A former clerk told me she saw envelopes changing hands and discovered bank statements from an offshore account." The 3 officials exchanged glances. "Ms. Leavitt," said Gordon, "we've been investigating Judge Winters for the past 8 months." Karoline felt her mouth drop open. "You have?" "Yes," said Agent Simmons. "We received a tip last year about unusual deposits to an account in the Cayman Islands. That account is linked to Judge Winters." Karoline couldn't believe what she was hearing. "So you already know he's corrupt?" "We have suspicions," said Gordon carefully. "But building a case against a federal judge isn't easy. We need solid evidence." "That's where you might be able to help us," added Agent Martinez. "Your Miller case has caught his attention. We believe Coastal Investments paid him to dismiss it." Karoline felt a mix of anger and vindication. "So I was right." "It appears so," said Gordon. "But here's the problem. Winters now knows you're suspicious. Our sources tell us he's worried you might expose him." "Is that why you called me in? Because you're worried about my safety?" Agent Simmons nodded. "Partly, but also because we think you might be able to help us catch him." "How?" "We want you to file a lawsuit against Judge Winters himself," said Gordon. "Claim judicial misconduct and demand damages for your client." Karoline stared at them. "But that would mean going public with your accusations," finished Martinez. "It would force Winters to defend himself, possibly making mistakes in the process." "It would also put a target on my back," said Karoline. "We wouldn't ask if we didn't think it was important," said Gordon, "and we'll provide protection." Karoline thought about Betty Miller and the other victims. "If I do this, I want guarantees that we'll reopen the cases he dismissed unfairly. If we prove misconduct, all his recent rulings will be reviewed," promised Gordon. After the meeting, Karoline walked to a nearby park and sat on a bench. Her mind was racing. Filing a lawsuit against Judge Winters would be the biggest risk of her career. If she failed, she might never work as a lawyer again. She called Nancy at the office. "I need to talk to you. It's important." An hour later, they met at a quiet restaurant. Karoline told her about the FBI meeting. "They want you to be their bait?" Nancy looked horrified. "Karoline, this is crazy. You can't take on a federal judge. What if I can prove he's corrupt? Think of all the people who lost their cases unfairly." Nancy shook her head. "The firm will never support this. Richard will fire you the moment you file that lawsuit." Richard Powell was the managing partner at their law firm. He was old school and cautious. "Then I'll do it independently," said Karoline. "You're really serious about this, aren't you?" "I have to be. It's the right thing to do." The next morning, Karoline went to Richard's office and explained what she wanted to do. As Nancy predicted, he was strongly against it. "Absolutely not," he said firmly. You will not use this firm's resources to attack a sitting judge. Do you have any idea how this would affect our reputation? What about our reputation for seeking justice? Karoline argued. Karoline, I'm sorry about your case, I really am. But this crusade of yours is professional suicide. I can't let you drag the firm into it. Then I quit, Karoline said suddenly. Richard looked shocked. Don't be hasty. Take some time to think about this. I have thought about it. This is more important than my job. That afternoon, Karoline cleared out her office. Nancy helped her carry boxes to her car. I think you're crazy, said Nancy, but I also think you're brave. Thanks. I'm going to need a good lawyer on my team. Interested? Nancy hesitated. Let me think about it. For the next 2 weeks, Karoline worked from her apartment, preparing her lawsuit against Judge Winters. She decided to seek $800 million in damages, a symbolic amount representing the estimated total losses suffered by all victims of his corrupt rulings. Gary Klein, the reporter, published his first article about the investigation. The headline read, "Federal Judge Under Scrutiny. Did Money Influence Justice?" The story didn't name Winters directly, but it contained enough details that people in legal circles could figure it out. The day after the article appeared, Karoline found her car windshield smashed. There was a note that said, "Drop it now." She called Agent Martinez, who sent someone to take photos and collect the note. "This means you're getting to him," the agent said. "But be careful." That night, Karoline received a call from a lawyer named Frank Miller, no relation to her client Betty Miller. "I read about what you're doing," he said. "I had a case before Judge Winters last year. He ruled against my client despite overwhelming evidence in our favor. I'd like to help you." "I could use the help," admitted Karoline. Frank wasn't the only one. A paralegal named Susan White also volunteered her services. Together, they set up a small office in a building downtown. One morning, Amy Rodriguez, the former clerk, showed up at their door. "I've been thinking about what you asked," she said to Karoline. "I'm ready to make a statement." With Amy's testimony, they now had an eyewitness to Judge Winters' corruption. Karoline filed the lawsuit the next day. The media attention was immediate and intense. Reporters camped outside her new office. Her phone rang constantly. Judge Winters issued a statement calling the lawsuit baseless and a desperate attempt by a failed lawyer to gain attention. That evening, Karoline received another call, this time from Betty Miller. "I saw you on the news," said Betty. "Are you really suing that judge because of what he did to our case?" "Yes, Mrs. Miller. I believe he was paid to rule against us." There was a pause. "Thank you," Betty said finally. "No one has ever fought this hard for me before." Those words made all the risk worthwhile for Karoline. The next day, she was preparing for a press conference when Nancy walked into the office. "So this is your new headquarters," Nancy said, looking around at the small space. "Not exactly Preston and Oaks, is it?" "No, but it's all mine," said Karoline. "What brings you here?" Nancy put her designer briefcase on the desk. "Richard asked me to talk some sense into you. He's worried about how this will affect the firm's reputation." "And what do you think?" Nancy smiled. "I think I just quit my job. Got room for another lawyer on your team?" Karoline hugged her friend tightly. "Always." As they prepared for the press conference together, Karoline's phone rang. It was Agent Martinez. "We just received a tip that Judge Winters is planning to leave the country," he said urgently. "We're moving to arrest him today." Karoline felt a rush of excitement and fear. What does this mean for the lawsuit? "It means it's about to get a lot bigger," said Martinez. "This isn't just about one corrupt judge anymore. We believe he's part of a network of officials who have been selling justice to the highest bidder for years." Karoline looked at her small team, Nancy, Frank, Susan, and Amy, all watching her expectantly. "Then we'd better get to work," she said. The arrest of Judge Harold Winters made national news. TV cameras captured the FBI escorting him out of his home in handcuffs early in the morning. His face appeared on every news channel and newspaper front page. By afternoon, Karoline's phone was ringing non-stop with calls from reporters wanting her comments. "We should make a statement," said Nancy, watching the news coverage in their small office. "Everyone wants to hear from you." Karoline nodded. She had prepared for this moment, but now that it was here, she felt nervous. What if this backfires? What if they can't prove the charges? The FBI wouldn't have arrested him if they didn't. "Have solid evidence," Frank reminded her. "Besides, we have our own case to pursue." They decided to hold a press conference on the steps of the courthouse where Karoline had lost the Miller case. By noon, a crowd of reporters had gathered. Cameras flashed as Karoline approached the microphones with her team behind her. "6 weeks ago, I stood in this courthouse and watched as Judge Harold Winters dismissed a case that should have helped dozens of elderly victims recover their life savings," she began. "Today, Judge Winters has been arrested on charges of corruption. This confirms what many in the legal community have suspected for years, that justice in his courtroom was for sale." A reporter shouted a question. "Ms. Leavitt, will you drop your lawsuit now that criminal charges have been filed?" "No," Karoline said firmly. "Our civil lawsuit will continue. The criminal case focuses on the judge's actions, but our lawsuit seeks to help the victims who lost everything because of his corrupt rulings." Another reporter asked, "Is it true you're seeking $800 million in damages? How did you arrive at that figure?" "We estimate that Judge Winters' corrupt rulings cost victims a total of $800 million over the past 5 years. Every penny we recover will go to those victims." The press conference lasted 30 minutes. By the end, Karoline felt drained but also energized. Their fight was now public and there was no turning back. Back at the office, they received a surprise visitor, Bill Gordon, the U.S. Attorney. "You did well at the press conference," he told Karoline. "But I need to warn you about what's coming next." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Judge Winters has powerful friends. They're already working to discredit you and anyone associated with this case." As if on cue, Nancy's phone buzzed with a news alert. She pulled it up and showed it to everyone. A new headline read, "Judge Winters' lawyer claims witch hunt, questions Leavitt's motives." Gordon nodded grimly. "See what I mean? They're going to attack your character, your legal skills, anything they can find." "Let them try," said Karoline. "I have nothing to hide." "Everyone has something they'd rather keep private," warned Gordon. "Just be prepared." The next morning, a story appeared in a major newspaper questioning Karoline's legal experience and suggesting she was pursuing the case for publicity. The article quoted several senior lawyers who criticized her decision to leave her firm. One of them was Richard Powell, her former boss. Ms. Leavitt was a promising attorney, but this crusade against a respected judge shows poor judgment and a lack of professional maturity, Powell was quoted as saying. The words stung, but Karoline tried not to let them distract her. The team focused on building their civil case, gathering testimonies from people who had lost cases before Judge Winters. A week after the arrest, Amy Rodriguez received a threatening letter at her home. "Stop lying about the judge or face consequences," it said. The FBI provided her with protection, but Amy was scared. "Maybe I should withdraw my testimony," she told Karoline during a late-night call. "It's not worth putting my family at risk." "I understand if you need to back out," Karoline said. "But remember, you're not alone in this. We're all taking risks, because it's the right thing to do." After a long pause, Amy said, "I'll think about it." The pressure continued to build. Someone created a website dedicated to attacking Karoline, filled with false information about her past. Hate mail arrived at her office daily. One night, someone spray-painted "liar" across the front door of her apartment building. Despite the harassment, they pressed forward with the lawsuit. More victims came forward with stories about losing cases before Judge Winters. Their small office could barely hold all the files and documents they were collecting. 3 weeks after the arrest, they received unexpected news. Senator Laura Bennett, the head of the Judiciary Committee, announced a congressional investigation into judicial corruption. "The allegations against Judge Winters are deeply troubling," the senator said in a televised statement. "If true, they represent one of the most serious breaches of judicial ethics in our nation's history." We must determine if this is an isolated case or part of a larger problem. The next day, Senator Bennett called Karoline directly. Ms. Leavitt, I've been following your case closely, she said. Would you be willing to testify before my committee? Of course, Senator, Karoline replied. I'll share everything I know. The invitation to testify before Congress brought new attention to their case. More reporters called for interviews. Legal experts debated the case on TV. Some supported Karoline, while others criticized her for attacking the judiciary. One evening, as Karoline was leaving the office, a black car pulled up beside her. The window rolled down, revealing an older man in an expensive suit. Ms. Leavitt, he said smoothly. My name is Howard Phillips. I represent certain interested parties who would like to resolve this situation quietly. What situation? Karoline asked, already suspicious. This unfortunate business with Judge Winters. My clients are prepared to offer a generous settlement to end your lawsuit. Who are your clients? The man smiled. That's not important. What is important is that we're offering $50 million. That's a significant sum for the victims you claim to represent. Karoline was shocked by the amount, but also angry at the attempt to buy her off. The damages we're seeking are $800 million, Mr. Phillips, and we have evidence to support that figure. Evidence can be interpreted in many ways, he said. Take the offer, Ms. Leavitt. Things will get much harder for you if you don't. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You're making powerful enemies. Karoline leaned closer to the car window. Tell your clients that justice isn't for sale anymore. Not to them and not to anyone else. The man's smile disappeared. You'll regret this decision. The window rolled up and the car drove away. Karoline immediately called Agent Martinez and told him about the encounter. The FBI increased security around her and her team. The next day, Gary Klein published a new article revealing that Judge Winters had received over $2 million in bribes over the past decade. The information came from bank records obtained by the FBI. The story created a fresh wave of outrage. More victims came forward. The phones in Karoline's office rang constantly. We need more help, Nancy said as they worked late into the night. We can't handle all these cases ourselves. I think I have a solution, said Karoline. She called Peter Douglas, a famous attorney known for taking on big cases. To her surprise, he agreed to join their team. I've been watching what you're doing, Douglas told her when they met. It takes courage to stand up to corruption like this. I want to be part of it. With Douglas on board, their lawsuit gained new credibility. His reputation brought additional resources and attention to the case. As the congressional hearing approached, Karoline prepared her testimony carefully. She wanted to be clear and factual, avoiding anything that might seem like a personal attack on Judge Winters. The night before the hearing, her parents called. They had been watching the news coverage from their home in New Hampshire. We're so proud of you, her mother said. But we're also worried. Are you sure you're safe? I'm being careful, Mom, Karoline assured her. The FBI is keeping an eye on things. Just remember, no case is worth your life, her father added. If it gets too dangerous, walk away. Karoline promised she would be careful, but she had no intention of walking away. Too many people were counting on her now. As she tried to sleep, that night Karoline thought about how far they had come. What started as a simple case about investment fraud had grown into something much bigger, a fight against corruption that reached the highest levels of the justice system. Tomorrow, she would tell her story to Congress and the entire nation. The truth would finally come out. The congressional hearing room was packed with people. Rows of seats were filled with reporters, lawyers, and members of the public. Cameras lined the back wall. At the front, members of the Senate Judiciary Committee sat behind a long, curved table with Senator Laura Bennett in the center. Karoline sat at a small table facing the senators. Her hands were steady, but her heart beat fast. She had testified in court many times, but never before Congress. Ms. Leavitt, you may begin your statement, said Senator Bennett. Karoline leaned toward the microphone. Thank you, Senator. 6 months ago, I was a corporate lawyer who believed in our justice system. Today, I'm here to tell you about how that system failed. Judge Harold Winters, a federal judge with over 20 years on the bench, sold justice to the highest bidder. He dismissed valid cases, ignored evidence, and ruled in favor of whoever paid him the most. She described the Miller case and how its dismissal led her to investigate the judge. She explained the pattern she found in his rulings and the evidence of bribes. She mentioned Amy Rodriguez, the former clerk who witnessed suspicious meetings in the judge's chambers. This isn't just about one corrupt judge, Karoline concluded. Our investigation suggests Judge Winters is part of a network of officials who have corrupted our courts. The $800 million we seek in our lawsuit represents the total harm done to hundreds of victims who were denied justice. Senator Bennett thanked her and opened the floor for questions. The first came from Senator Dan Wilson, an older man with a stern face. Ms. Leavitt, you've made serious accusations today, but isn't it possible you're simply bitter about losing a case? No, Senator, Karoline replied calmly. The FBI had been investigating Judge Winters for months before I lost my case. Their evidence, combined with our own, shows a clear pattern of corruption. What about your former colleagues? Asked another senator. Many experienced lawyers have criticized your actions. Why should we trust your judgment over theirs? Those critics haven't seen the evidence we've gathered, said Karoline. And some may have their own reasons for wanting to protect the status quo. The questions continued for over 2 hours. Some senators were supportive, others hostile. Karoline answered each one directly and honestly. By the end, she was tired but felt she had made her case effectively. As she left the hearing room, reporters surrounded her, shouting questions. Peter Douglas stepped in to help her through the crowd. You did well in there, he told her as they made their way outside. Very well. Back at their office, the team watched the news coverage of the hearing. Most reports were positive, focusing on Karoline's clear testimony and the shocking nature of the corruption she described. This is going to put pressure on the court to move our case forward quickly, said Nancy. She was right. The next day, they received notice that their lawsuit had been assigned to Judge Maria Gonzalez, a respected judge known for her integrity. The first hearing was scheduled for the following week. Judge Winters' legal team filed a motion to dismiss the case, claiming Karoline had no standing to sue and that the judge was protected by judicial immunity. But Judge Gonzalez denied the motion and allowed the case to proceed. The allegations here go beyond normal judicial actions, she wrote in her ruling. If proven, they represent a criminal abuse of power that is not protected by immunity. As they prepared for trial, Karoline received an unexpected call from U.S. Attorney Bill Gordon. Judge Winters wants to make a deal, Gordon told her. He's offering to plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for information about others involved in the corruption scheme. What kind of information? Asked Karoline. Names, dates, bank accounts. According to his lawyer, he can identify at least 12 other judges and numerous lawyers who have been involved in fixing cases. Karoline was stunned. 12 other judges? That's worse than we thought. Much worse, agreed Gordon. This could be the biggest judicial corruption scandal in U.S. history. Karoline discussed the development with her team that evening. If Winters cooperates with prosecutors, how will that affect our lawsuit? Asked Frank. It makes it more likely we'll win, said Peter Douglas. But it might also mean a quicker settlement. Nancy looked concerned. The victims deserve their day in court. They need to see justice done publicly. Karoline nodded. I agree. We'll continue with the lawsuit regardless of what happens in the criminal case. The next day, Judge Winters formally agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. He pleaded guilty to bribery, corruption, and obstruction of justice in exchange for a reduced sentence. As part of his plea, he admitted to receiving over $5 million in bribes during his time on the bench. He named companies, law firms, and individuals who had paid him to rule in their favor. The list included Coastal Investments, the company from Karoline's original Miller case. The revelations shocked the legal community. 2 more judges were arrested based on Winters' testimony. Several prominent lawyers were also charged with bribery. Senator Bennett announced expanded hearings into judicial corruption. The Justice Department formed a special task force to investigate all the cases mentioned in Winters' plea. Amidst the growing scandal, Karoline received a call from Richard Powell, her former boss. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I didn't believe. You were right about Winters, and I said things I shouldn't have." "Thank you for calling, Richard," said Karoline. "I appreciate that. The firm's partners have been talking. We'd like you to come back with a promotion to senior partner." Karoline laughed softly. "That's a generous offer, but I think I'm on a different path now." As their lawsuit moved forward, more evidence emerged supporting their claims. Bank records showed payments to Judge Winters that coincided with key rulings. Witnesses came forward with stories of how the judge had pressured them to drop cases or accept unfair settlements. 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Karoline received another visit from Howard Phillips, the man who had offered her the $50 million settlement. "My clients have reconsidered their position," he said. "They're now willing to offer $500 million to settle the case." "We're asking for $800 million, Karoline reminded him. $500 million is still a significant amount, and it would save everyone the trouble and expense of a trial. Karoline studied him for a moment. "Who exactly are your clients, Mr. Phillips?" He hesitated. "A consortium of interested parties." "You mean the companies and individuals who benefited from Judge Winters' corrupt rulings?" He didn't deny it. "They're willing to make things right." "We'll consider the offer," Karoline said, "but we'd need full disclosure of all parties involved and proof that the money will actually reach the victims." Phillips left, promising to consult with his clients. That evening, Karoline discussed the offer with her team and representatives from the victim groups. $500 million would help a lot of people," said Betty Miller. "Many of us are elderly. We can't wait years for a resolution. But if we go to trial, we might win the full $800 million, argued Nancy. Or we might get less, cautioned Peter Douglas. Trials are unpredictable. After hours of discussion, they decided to make a counteroffer, $700 million, with strict conditions about how the money would be distributed. They also insisted on a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing from all parties involved. 3 days later, Phillips returned with a response. $650 million with partial admission of wrongdoing. "I think we should take it," Peter advised. "It's a good settlement, and it guarantees the victims will be compensated quickly." Karoline looked at Betty Miller and the other victims who had joined them. "What do you think? It's your lives that were affected." Betty spoke for the group. "We trust you, Karoline. If you think this is fair, we'll accept it." After one more round of negotiations, they reached a final agreement, $675 million, with a full public acknowledgement of the corruption and a commitment to cooperate with ongoing investigations. The settlement was announced at a press conference the next day. Karoline stood before the cameras with Betty Miller and other victims beside her. "Today marks a victory not just for these brave individuals, but for our justice system," she said. "This settlement represents accountability for those who abused their power and betrayed the public trust." As Karoline looked out at the sea of reporters, she felt a mix of emotions. Relief that the victims would finally receive compensation, pride in what their small team had accomplished, and determination to continue fighting for a more just legal system. The battle was far from over. Judge Winters' cooperation had exposed a web of corruption that reached into courthouses across the country. But for the first time in months, Karoline allowed herself to feel that they were winning. 1 year had passed since the settlement. Karoline sat in her new office looking out at the Boston skyline. The walls were decorated with framed newspaper headlines about the case and thank you letters from victims. On her desk was a small plaque that read, "Justice Prevails." The $675 million settlement had been paid in full. Each victim received compensation based on their losses. Betty Miller got back her entire life savings plus interest. For many of the elderly victims, the money meant they could live their final years with dignity instead of financial worry. But the money was only part of the story. The case had triggered the largest investigation of judicial corruption in American history. Based on Judge Winters' testimony, 15 judges across the country had been charged with various crimes. Dozens of lawyers and business executives also faced charges for bribing judges. Senator Bennett's committee had passed new legislation requiring stricter financial disclosures from judges and establishing an independent commission to investigate complaints of judicial misconduct. The bill was called the Leavitt Act in honor of Karoline's role in exposing the corruption. The phone on Karoline's desk rang. It was Nancy. "Turn on Channel 7, Nancy said excitedly. "They're about to announce the sentencing." Karoline grabbed the remote and turned on the TV mounted on her wall. A reporter stood outside the federal courthouse. "Former Judge Harold Winters has just been sentenced to 15 years in prison for corruption, bribery, and obstruction of justice," the reporter announced. "This is despite his cooperation with prosecutors, which Judge Raymond cited as insufficient, given the extent of Winters' crimes and the damage done to public trust." Karoline felt a wave of emotions. It had been a long journey from that day in Winters' courtroom when he unfairly dismissed her case. Justice had finally been served, but at a great cost. Lives had been disrupted, careers ended, and the public's faith in the court severely damaged. Her assistant buzzed her intercom. "Ms. Leavitt, your 2 o'clock appointment is here." "Send them in, please," Karoline replied. The door opened and a young woman entered. She looked nervous, clutching a folder to her chest. "Ms. Leavitt, I'm Olivia Parker. Thank you for seeing me." "Please sit down," said Karoline, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "How can I help you?" Olivia placed her folder on the desk and opened it. "I'm a clerk at the Suffolk County Court. I think I've found evidence of a judge altering records to help certain defendants." Karoline felt a familiar mix of concern and determination. After the Winters case, she had established the Judicial Integrity Project, a non-profit organization dedicated to investigating corruption in the courts and helping victims seek justice. People like Olivia often came to them with tips and evidence. "Tell me everything," Karoline said, reaching for her notebook. As Olivia explained what she had discovered, Karoline thought about how much had changed in the past year. Her small team had grown into an organization with offices in 3 cities. Nancy now led their legal department. Frank handled investigations. Amy Rodriguez, the former clerk who had bravely testified against Judge Winters, worked as their outreach coordinator, helping other court employees come forward with evidence of wrongdoing. Peter Douglas had returned to his private practice but remained a close advisor and often represented their cases in court. After meeting with Olivia and arranging for a follow-up investigation, Karoline had another appointment, a video call with Senator Bennett. "The Justice Department just sent over their quarterly report," the senator said when her face appeared on Karoline's screen. "The task force has identified 127 cases that need to be reviewed due to potential corruption. That's just from the Southern District. We'll need more resources to help all those victims," said Karoline. "I agree. I've secured additional funding for your organization in the new budget. The committee believes your team is best positioned to help these people navigate the appeals process." After the call, Karoline checked her watch. It was time for her to leave for a special event. She grabbed her coat and headed downstairs to the waiting car. The driver took her to a community center in a working-class neighborhood where Betty Miller lived. Today was the grand opening of the Miller Financial Education Center, funded by a portion of the settlement money. The center would provide free financial advice and education to seniors, helping them avoid scams and make wise investment decisions. As Karoline approached the building, she saw Betty waiting by the entrance. The elderly woman smiled brightly and gave Karoline a warm hug. "I never thought I'd see my name on a building," Betty said, looking up at the sign. "Thank you for making this happen." "It was your idea," Karoline reminded her. "I just helped with the paperwork." Inside, the center was filled with people. Many were victims from the Winters case who had chosen to donate part of their settlements to fund the center. There were also volunteers, financial advisors who had agreed to provide free services, and community members eager to learn about the new resource. Karoline was asked to say a few words at the opening ceremony. She kept her speech brief, focusing on the resilience of the victims and their generosity in creating something positive from their painful experiences. After the ceremony, as people mingled and toured the facility, Gary Klein approached Karoline. The reporter had covered the Winters case from the beginning and had written a book about the scandal that was now being turned into a movie. "Quite a change from when we first met," he said, looking around the room. "Back then, you were a corporate lawyer with a losing case." Karoline smiled. "Life takes unexpected turns." "Any regrets?" Gary asked. "You could have been a senior partner at your old firm by now, making a lot more money than running a nonprofit." "Not for a second," Karoline said firmly. "This work matters, more than money." That evening, Karoline had dinner with her parents, who had moved to Boston to be closer to her after the case ended. They had worried about her safety throughout the ordeal and were proud of what she had accomplished. "I saw Judge Winters' sentencing on the news," her father said as they ate. 15 years seems fair." "The money he took can be repaid," her mother added. "But the trust he broke can't be fixed so easily." Karoline nodded. "That's why our work isn't done. We need to rebuild confidence in the justice system." Later that night, as Karoline returned to her apartment, she found a letter that had been slipped under her door. It was from a law student who had been inspired by her story to focus on ethics and judicial reform. "Your courage showed me that one person can make a difference," the letter read. "I hope to follow in your footsteps someday." Karoline placed the letter with dozens of others she had received over the past year. Each one reminded her of why she had taken such risks and why she continued to fight for a more just legal system. As she prepared for bed, Karoline thought about the day Judge Winters had unfairly dismissed her case. She had felt helpless and angry then, unsure if she could do anything to right the wrong. She never imagined that her decision to investigate one corrupt judge would lead to a national movement for judicial reform. The path had not been easy. She had faced threats, lost her job, and put her reputation on the line. But she had also found her true purpose and built something meaningful. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more cases to investigate, more victims to help, more corruption to expose. But tonight, Karoline Leavitt slept peacefully, knowing that she had responded to injustice not with despair but with determination, and in doing so had changed not just her own life but the lives of countless others.